And welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have you back with us today. Author today is Jennifer Rose Asher, coming on to talk about her book, Journey to My Daughter, a story about adoption and finding and adopting your child. And what a story, what a message today. To have a little clip from Jennifer's website, a little YouTube video clip to share with you here. And later on, a little clip from the Audible version of Jennifer's book to give you a little sense of that. And all the links in the show notes. Here's a little bit from the podcast, and we'll jump right in. Thanks for being here. Please share this with anyone that you think would identify and relate to this story. Powerful here on Living the Next Chapter.
I had a wonderful life, but something was missing. I realized that I wanted to be a mother. I thought it would be easy, but it wasn't. We decided to adopt a baby. I searched the globe for our child. I thought I could work hard and make this happen quickly. But the more I tried to force things to happen, the more trouble I found. I needed to listen to the universe to find our child. It led me on a path I didn't expect. But when I followed the signs and allowed them to guide me, things started to fall into place. And I could feel that everything was right.
Clients had literally never been allowed to see this office before, and shortly I would understand why. I sat in silence for what seemed like an extremely long cab ride. It could have been only a few minutes, or it may have been the better part of an hour. I had no concept of time, and all of the streets looked eerily similar. I sat alone in the back of the taxi while Mindy took the front seat, directing the driver. Just yesterday, this young girl was a complete stranger. Today, she held my fate in her hands. I was expected to trust her to manage the most important transaction of my life, and she was clearly just a child herself. I also had to trust she was actually taking me to the office, and not to some place where I would conveniently disappear, never to be seen by my family again. After all, I was virtually alone in a very communist country where I didn't speak a word of the language and didn't know a single other person. I made a conscious decision not to allow my thoughts to travel in this direction. I just had to believe everything was going to be fine. I would call the agency once we arrived at the office, where they must have a working phone, and they would find a way around this snag. The calm and pleasant voice back in Virginia, who prepared me for this trip, would know someone at the embassy to call and clear everything up. We could return the following morning and get all the paperwork squared away. I could then use this incident as leverage for them to help me as quickly and efficiently as possible in the future. Yeah, right. The mood in the cab was tense. I was angry and scared. Mindy clearly was off her game and dealing in uncharted territory, as she told me several times. Clients were not allowed in the office. Even the driver seemed nervous, like we were headed to an area of Hanoi where an American woman should not be going.
All right, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. If you're watching the video of this, please welcome our first ever dog on the podcast. Fergie is here. Hi, Fergie. How are you? Fergie's not talking.
Fergie had to make her presence known by barking, so she was invited to come and sit on my lap for a little while.
Fergie is joining us for the podcast, and Fergie hasn't written a book yet, but we have great expectations that Fergie's going to write a great novel that will bring dogs everywhere together. Thank you, Fergie, for joining us. And along with Fergie's special guest joining us as well, Jennifer is here as well with Fergie. Welcome, Jen. Nice to have you on the podcast. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is great. And we heard Fergie give a little yap in the background before we started. I'm like, oh no, we got to have Fergie part of this. So welcome, Fergie. You're gorgeous. I love Fergie. Okay. Yes. So I'm going to be totally distracted by Fergie in a good way. I love this. Welcome to the podcast. Jennifer, you and I have had a conversation already about your book, and I've been doing some research and going through and checking out all of the great things around your book. And one thing I do want to talk about today is the audio version of your book on Audible, is where I was listening to it, and get your insight on that. But welcome to the podcast, Jen. Nice to have you here.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be here.
And you're joining us from Texas, correct?
Yes, right outside of Dallas.
Very nice. Excellent. And have you been in Texas your whole life, or?
No, I've been here about almost 13 years now.
Okay. Amazing. Good. And what's the best thing about Texas that for a Canadian who's never been there, I know it's the biggest place in the world. The sky is big in Texas, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. The best thing about Texas is that on normal days at this time of year, it's about 60 degrees. Sometimes it's 70.
Mm.
So that's really, it was a huge, huge thing for me when we moved down here. I'm from Chicago, from the Chicago area. And I really wanted to be someplace that was warm.
Yeah. Nice. Great. And you have an interesting story, which I'm so happy to get into. We're going to be talking about adoption and your adoption story as you were out there looking to add to your family and bring someone special into your home. And when we had our pre-interview discussion earlier, I got to meet that special person. And that was so cool for her to kind of drop in, and I get to see her on camera. And so we've kind of spoiled it. There's a happy ending to this story, and that's a great thing. But you've written a book about your journey, and you thought you were going to go one way with adoption, and then you ended up in a totally different spot, and you ended up with such a great story. Can you take us behind the scenes of your book? When did you start writing this book?
Well, I started writing the book in 2007. I wrote the first draft for my daughter when she was about 5 years old, because someone had asked me a question about what had happened, and I realized that I didn't remember all the details. So I wanted to write it down just so that I could tell my daughter the story of everything we went through to find her.
Amazing. So that was the initial intent. It wasn't to be a world-famous author and be on a podcast with your dog. It was to really, just for her, right?
It was really just for her. That my first draft was really just for her. And I worked in the adoption industry. The story is very inspirational. It's very kind of meant to be. And I used to tell many of my clients kind of the thumbnail version of the story of how I found my daughter. And they were always so impressed and so inspired by it that frequently they would say, you need to write a book. You need to write this down. And I would tell them, well, I kind of already wrote it, but I'm not sharing it with the world. And they said, you need to share it with the world. You need to share it with other people like us. And the time just wasn't right. And I'm so glad that I didn't do it then, because Hillary was very young. She was only 5. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm so glad I waited. The universe told me the time wasn't right. And by the time I put it out there into the world, she was 20 years old. So I was able to get her permission and make sure she was okay with it. Because if I had put it out when she was 5 or 6, really, she wouldn't have been able to give me that permission. And what if she had been unhappy with it later? So I'm really, really glad I waited.
It's amazing. So at what point in Hillary's life did you have that conversation with her to say, here's a book has been written, and here's my thoughts written when you were younger. Here's the book in this stage, and she got to look at it and read it through. Tell me about that kind of interaction, because that's a big day. That's a very memorable day to go through that together.
It wasn't really a distinct day.
Okay.
It was, she knew that I had written the book. Okay. When she was younger, I would tell her about her adoption. I actually wrote little baby books for all of my kids before they were a year old. And it was of their adoption stories. Let me pull one out. If I can open my drawer. Of their adoption stories. And these were baby books. This was long before, like you said, long before I knew I was going to be an author. This is the original book
Oh, come
that I
on.
made for Hillary.
Wow.
And I made it when she was less than a year old. I made this in 2001. And this is just her story of how we found her. So she always knew that she was adopted and where she came from. And it was just her story. So I used to read this to her when she was a baby. And she always knew she was adopted. Same thing with my son who was adopted. He has his own version of the book. And my biological son, I made him a book as well. I would read them the story through their childhood so that they always had that space where it was a safe space to discuss it, to ask any questions they might have, to know that I was comfortable talking about it. They also could have their book. I made several copies of each book. And they were able to have them in their room. So if they wanted to look at their story themselves, if they ever had any questions for themselves or wanted to review or forgot, they could always look through it. Hillary frequently brought her book to school for story time, for show and tell when she was little. She was very proud of her story. So she always knew the basic story. And then, I don't know, when she was 8 or 9, she would ask questions about Vietnam. And I told her, I've written a whole book. If you ever want to read it, I'm happy to read it to you or read it with you. And she's like, no, I'm good. And, but when I decided in 2020 to possibly share this story with the world, I did talk with her and I said, do you mind? Is that all right? And she said, absolutely. I want you to help other adoptive families. I'm so glad that I'm a part of your family. And I really, if there's a way that you or I can help other adoptive families to be able to adopt, I want to be able to do that.
That's amazing.
So she was very supportive.
That's great. I love that. And I love how open you are. And I love, the one thing I really love is the fact that you were able to grab that book in 1 second and show it. Like, that means something, that it's that close, it's that at hand, and that it's that meaningful for you, and it's still here with you. That you got me with that just by doing that, just by the way. Okay, so for Hillary, because the book we're talking about is focused on Hillary, was there points in her life as she's growing up where she really struggled with her identity, or because you showing them through their entire life and sharing the story on a regular basis, you've built this kind of safe spot for them. And it's not like it's a new topic. It's something you talk about often. Does Hillary struggle at all with a sense of identity?
I mean, she's definitely had her moments. She always talks about she forgets that she's Asian, and she doesn't feel like she's Asian. And I hope she doesn't get mad at me, but I tell a funny story about I took her to an SAT review class once when she was a senior in high school to try to improve her SAT scores. And I picked her up the first day, and she got in the car and she said, "Mom, the entire class was full of Asians." And I was like, "Hillary, you're Asian." She said, "Not like that."
Wow.
She said, "They're trying to get a perfect score on the SAT. I just want to raise mine a little." Yeah. She said, "They're very intense, Mom." So she sometimes has a hard time with that, where she kind of misses that. But fortunately, we live in an area where there are a lot of Asians. She was a figure skater, and there are a lot of Asian girls in figure skating. So she saw a lot of girls that looked like her growing up. We have some big Asian grocery stores around here, so we've kind of exposed her to the food. We've done a lot, as much as we can, to try to make her comfortable with it. She has moments. She has moments where we've sat and had in-depth conversations about her birth mother and that whole situation and how to maintain a relationship with her birth mother in a way that she felt comfortable with, how to set boundaries with her birth mother. We've talked about each of these things. She didn't ever have a real breakdown or a huge identity crisis. Maybe she will sometime in the future. I don't know. Hopefully, if she does, she'll talk to me about it and I'll be able to help her through it.
That's great. So now we've kind of talked around the topic of your book. I'd like to kind of get into this as well, to kind of go there, because I think that really feeds the story and brings us up to date. So from my understanding, from our conversation and reading through all the stuff online about the book, some really great reviews, by the way. people are really loving the book. You were on one path to find your adoptee, to find them, and then something changed, and you ended up finding Hillary in a completely different part of the world than you originally had planned. Can you kind of give us, we want people to buy the book or listen to the audio version, obviously, but can you kind of give us some background to these two pretty amazing things that were going on? How your path changed so drastically from one area to another.
Well, and my path changed drastically multiple times. That's kind of where the cover of my book comes from, because I wanted this forking path that went off in multiple directions. You know, if you recall, my book begins with me not wanting any children and making a big point about that I never wanted any children. I never wanted to have children. Once I decided that I did want to have children, I took the conventional route and got pregnant and had 2 miscarriages. And after the second one, I said, okay, that's it. Fork in the road. We're going to adopt a baby. We decided that we wanted to adopt internationally. We really did not want to get matched with a pregnant birth mom. I was very fearful of becoming too attached to a birth mom and then having her change her mind once the baby was born. And I was just, knowing myself, I didn't want to create that attachment and then be disappointed in that way. So we decided that we were going to go internationally. And I was, at first, hell-bent on going to China. I knew babies were adopted from China. I knew of people who had adopted babies from China. I kind of wanted a girl, and I knew there were a lot of girls in China. Thought this was a great place to go. And everything about the Chinese program was great, except that it's a very long process. And I was in a hurry. And I was sure I wanted to be done with this. I wanted to be a mom as soon as possible. And I wasn't willing to wait the 2 years or more that it would take to go through the Chinese program. So I had an adoption agency that I spoke with who suggested the Vietnamese program. She said there's a lot of the same benefits that you get with the China program, but there's a quicker process. And I said, great, sign us up. Fork in the road again, switch to Vietnam. Then I was just talking this morning about that. I was a person who did not ever travel alone. If I was driving an hour and a half, I would whine until my husband would come with me, so I wouldn't have to go by myself. But I was determined. I was bound and determined to get this baby. And they called me from the agency and said, "We have this baby. Would you be willing to travel next week?"
Wow.
And I said, "There's no way my husband can travel next week." And they said, "That's fine. You would have to go twice. And for the first trip, only one parent needs to go." And so I was really faced with a dilemma. And I was like, well, I guess if that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do. So my very first solo trip like that, I went to Vietnam by myself, which was quite a trip.
Yeah.
And once I got there, kind of everything went wrong, and I tried to force it. And the kind of undertone of my book, which I didn't realize when I wrote the book that this was what I was writing about, was this, that at the beginning of the book, I really tried to force everything. I tried to force this to happen. And when there was a problem, I was going to fix the problem, and I was going to steamroll over people until they did what I wanted. And it didn't help. Because I went to Vietnam and I pushed people around and I tried to make things happen, and I got people to change their plans and take me to a northern province in the middle of our trip, 4 hours away, and all these crazy adventures, which is, the book is really kind of fun to read, even if you're not interested in adoption, because it's just all this crazy story. But I really tried to force the issue. And when I came back from Vietnam, the agency told me that they were terminating all the adoptions in Vietnam. So even though I had met this baby while I was over there, fallen in love with her, and this was exactly what I didn't want with a domestic adoption. I had fallen in love with this baby herself. I met her, I held her, and now they're telling me, no, we're terminating all the adoptions in Vietnam. So I had to kind of start over, and I did paperwork for several different countries, looked at several different countries and said, we're going to go to whatever country comes through first, basically. And I called all around, and the internet was very, very different back then.
Yeah.
You couldn't just pull up a Google search like you can now. So I would search and find adoption agencies, and I called everywhere that I could. And in the end, it was a domestic agency who just so happened to remember having talked to me. And that's where I found my baby. But it was very unexpected. And then there were some issues once we got to, she was born in Oklahoma. And once we got to Oklahoma, but at that point I had kind of mellowed a little bit, and I kind of learned, okay, just let things happen. And I still pushed a little, and I still did everything I could on my end to work with what was coming at me, but I let things happen. And because of that, it all worked out.
It's amazing that you traveled to the other side of the world in pursuit of this, and then it happens more closely to home than you had anticipated. And I think,
for sure,
I don't want to give away the story because I want people to buy the book, but there is an interesting turn that I think we talked about that happened later on, where you had a reconnection with this baby that you had met back in the days, early days. And that is, again, I don't want to give it away. I don't want to give it all away because I want people to buy the book, but there's this unique moment, and that really stuck with me after we talked about this. And I don't know if you want to share a slight little bit of it, really, I just don't want to spoil it.
And that's not really in the book.
Okay.
It's in the afterword. It's in the epilogue.
Okay.
That story is in the epilogue that we were able to reconnect and actually meet, which was amazing.
That's amazing. Okay, so bring us up to date. You're on the path. You're overlooking in Thailand. You come back to the U.S. and can you kind of give us a sense of how this happened? Where I know you were relentless as far as getting your name out there and talking to people. And there was a mention of a Post-it note and somebody remembering you that you were there, and maybe badgering is a word. I don't know, but you were relentless. You wanted to make sure people remembered your name. But how close to home did you find Hillary?
Well, first of all, yes, I was. It wasn't a Post-it note. It was the old-fashioned message pads.
Message pads, okay.
Where secretaries would write the messages down.
Yep.
And as you can tell, I like to talk. So I would call and talk to all these agencies, and I would just tell them my story. And I would tell them I went to Vietnam. I had to come home without the baby. I just want to be a mother. Please help me find a child. And I would tell them my whole story, and I asked, very strongly asked, that they would please write down and keep my phone number just in case something were to show up, which it did.
Nice. And that, yeah. Can you take us to the day when you met Hillary for the first time?
Oh, goodness. The day I met Hillary the first time. Well, I had gotten a call at about 7 o'clock. Well, I was riding my horse, and I didn't have my cell phone with me. And when I got in the car, there were several missed calls. So I called back, and it was about 7 o'clock at night. And this woman asked me all these questions, and she said, well, I have this baby who was born today. Could you get here tonight? And I lived in Chicago at the time. And the baby was in Oklahoma. And I sat there and I was like, what if I ran to the airport right now? And I was like, no, I still wouldn't get there in time. I said, no, I can't get there tonight. Even if I got in my car and drove right now, I wouldn't get there tonight. She said, what about tomorrow morning? Could you get here tomorrow morning? I said, I can do that. I can be there tomorrow morning. So all of a sudden, we're dealing with this newborn. We had no plans for a newborn. If we had adopted overseas like we had planned, we would have been getting a child who was much older. So I ran home, got the paperwork off the fax machine. A lot of this is very dated because it was a while ago now. We got the paper off the fax machine, and we looked at all the information, and we called from the house phone, and we talked to the agency, and we said, all right. And then I had to go with my sister-in-law and go to the store and buy everything I would need for a baby because I really didn't have anything yet.
Yeah.
And then I had to try to figure out how to get there, make my travel arrangements, pack for some undetermined amount of time. So I was up pretty much the whole night. I flew out at about 5 o'clock in the morning, had a layover in Dallas, I believe. And finally, after rushing and rushing, arrived at the adoption agency office, which was empty. And I got there, and I'd been rushing and rushing and doing for hours and hours now. And I get there, and there's nobody there. And I'm looking around going, okay, what do I do now? And so I started looking at the photo albums, and from like the bathroom, I guess, the secretary comes out and scared me to death. And I was like, oh, sorry. And she said, oh, the Virginia, the attorney went to go pick up the baby. And I was like, went to go pick up the baby? And she's like, she said, yeah, she went to the hospital. They're releasing the baby and her birth parents. And I was like, oh, okay. So she gave me some paperwork to fill out. And as I was filling it out, the door opened, and in came Virginia and these two birth parents carrying this baby carrier. And I was just so overwhelmed. And I introduced myself, and then I told them all about my trip to Vietnam, and we sat down and we had a whole discussion. And once they left, I was like, okay. And Virginia kind of was like, okay, I got to kick you out of the office now. You got to leave. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this baby?
Wow.
I don't know what to do now. And she's like, you'll figure it out. And I was like, all right. So we left and we went to Walmart and we bought everything that I hadn't bought the night before. And it was a crazy day.
I'm trying to live through you vicariously right in the moment, but I'd be staring at this baby the entire time going, like, is this real? Like you're actually, like, you guys trust me with this baby? Like, I'm going now and it's my responsibility? I came here with no one, and now I have this person looking at me as, wow.
It was very surreal. It was, and what was funny was, as I was talking with the birth parents, because, I was a first-time mom. I didn't know anything about babies. Now, fortunately, she was just sleeping in her little carrier. I, obviously looked at her when she first came in, but I was so distracted, talking with these birth parents. I was like, oh yeah, the baby. I was excited to learn from them. I knew that the amount of time that I would have with them was going to be very limited. So I wanted to get whatever information I could at that time. And, really it was a lot trying to remember everything because, I knew for her, I wanted to be able to tell her as much as I could about them.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, once they left, then I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is real.
So, okay. So in us just having a conversation today and in you recounting some of this, what does this mean to you as it relates to your book, to be able to share your story with people? Because I can see you lighting up as you remember certain things and you're like, oh yeah, and this and this. What does it mean for you to have this book and share it with the world and share Hillary's story?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, it's kind of like letting people open your dirty underwear drawer. But it's a wonderful thing. And I originally chose to share it because I wanted to help adoptive families to know what was involved with the process, and also to kind of have them avoid some of the pitfalls that I went through and some of the problems that I went through. And I was hoping that by being able to read through my story, it would help them to avoid those problems, but also give them a lot of hope that everything's going to happen. Everything's going to fall in place as it's supposed to. The problem, the biggest issue for me with adoption, the hardest part of the process was the fact that, I had all these friends who were pregnant and they knew exactly when their baby was coming. They would, look in books and they could see little pictures of, oh, now your baby is the size of a grape, and now your baby is the size of a tennis ball. And here I am going, okay, I could have a baby tomorrow and I might not have one for 2 years. And there's no way to know. And it's very hard and it's very frustrating because you kind of don't want to make too many plans because what if they call and I need to go on a trip? And it's very, very difficult, that kind of uncertainty and waiting. So I really wanted to give other hopeful adoptive parents some inspiration and words of wisdom that this will happen and it will all fall into place as it's supposed to, and just try and take a deep breath. What was remarkable was that I went through, I had the first draft from long ago, but I really rewrote the book, basically probably 6 or 8 times in the process of editing it. And once I finished the book, I read it. One of the exercises we had to do before sending it to copywriting was we had to read the entire book out loud 3 times. And so I read it out loud and I said, oh my gosh, this isn't a book about adoption. This is a book about how I learned to pay attention, how I learned to trust the signs from the universe. And while it is on the surface a story about my daughter's adoption, and it's a great story. It really reads like a novel. It's not like a nonfiction book. There's also kind of this undercurrent of this message that take a deep breath, pay attention, and try and go with the path that you're supposed to be on. And I just finished the first draft of my second book, and I had the same kind of experience, even though it's a completely different book. So
you got me curious with that.
This is a novel. It's fiction. I talked to Hillary, we started this conversation about Hillary and how she felt about this. Well, Hillary was a competitive figure skater until last year. And this has kind of took over her life and mine for lots and lots of years. And the things that went on in her skating career were very interesting. It was very much like a soap opera. And I once asked her, can I write a book from this? And she said, oh, yeah. And then when I finished this book, she said to me, just so you know, Mom, I don't want you writing about my skating. She said, there's just too many people and not for a long time. I need for like 10 years to pass before you write about this period of my life, because it was a little traumatic and there's a lot of people involved. And I need for them to all be retired before you write about it. And I said, all right. I said, what if I wrote about when you first learned to skate? And she said, oh yeah, that's fine. So my new book is about, and it's very fictionalized. Everything's been changed and the names have changed and adjusted and the stories have changed and all that. But pretty much everything in the book we went through in some way or another. And it's about 4 little girls and their moms. And it was supposed to be the stories of the 4 moms and the 4 girls and how they all came together every Monday afternoon for skating class and sitting in the stands and how they all came together. Which it is, that is very much what it is. But I thought it would be more stories about, like individual stories about the moms. But as I wrote it, I kind of realized that what this story was really about was kind of parents' involvement in young sports. And in the book, the kids are 5 and 6 years old. So these are very, very young kids. And I realized that the drama and the angst that I experienced in that time of her life was so extreme. And I spent more hours on the phone crying and being upset about what level she was going to be in the ice show, what group she was going to be in the ice show, than I did when it was very serious and she was going to nationals and there were all kinds of much more serious big girl topics going on. I was able to manage that better than I was when she was 5 years old. So it was about just let kids be kids, let them learn to play their sport, don't get overly involved, and everything will turn out great. And so I just finished it. I'm really, really happy about it. I'm really excited about finishing up and editing and all of that.
Do you have a timeline for this book for release?
I'm expecting to publish hopefully in the fall.
Okay. Do you have a working title that you can share, or is it all hush-hush?
No, the working title is Freezing in the Stands.
I love that. In Canada here, we do a lot of hockey, and there's a lot of hockey parents that would, and skating parents that obviously would love to connect with that book. So that's a great title too. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and it's it's kind of like my first book that I originally wrote it for adoptive families, and yet I've gotten so much feedback from people in all different areas of life that have really taken a lot of inspiration from the book, whether they were involved with adoption or not.
Mm-hmm.
Some people that, it was completely different, that it was just about, oh, I need to pay attention to what's going on and follow the right path. And I think it's the same thing with this book. It's technically about little skaters, but it could be about anything. It could be about, I even wrote that in the author's note at the beginning. This could be about skating moms, or it could be about dance moms, or soccer moms, or chess moms, or anything. Yeah. Moms of young kids get so competitive and get so involved in these things, even more than the kids do, that it's a great kind of cautionary tale that's told in a fun and humorous little story.
It's great. And I love that they both have this overarching slow down, don't push, things will happen the way they're supposed to happen. I love that they both capture this in two different formats and two different scenarios, but the message is still there. I love that. Amazing. So, okay, we don't want to keep you too much longer. We know that Fergie probably needs you right now. So, one thing I would love to have
on the floor asleep.
Is he okay? So, one thing I would love to have, just while we're chatting, I would love to have a picture of Fergie with the book. Is that possible that you can send me that? Because I would love to share Fergie with the world.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's just a request that I would love to have. So let's do that, and we'll be promoting Fergie.
I actually have that. When I first was promoting my pre-sale campaign for this book, I put Fergie in front of the computer, and I posted pictures of Fergie with the computer. And then when the book launched, I posted a picture of Fergie with the book. So yes, Fergie's been and I'm sure she'll be a big part of my campaign this summer for my pre-sale campaign for the new book too.
Awesome. Well, we love Fergie, and Fergie is always welcome to come on the podcast. Jennifer, how do we send people your way? How do people stay in touch with updates on the book? Maybe I'm thinking maybe there's adoptive parents or want to be adoptive parents that are looking for somebody just to bounce some ideas off of and talk to. And they're looking for somebody that could be in their corner. How do they reach out to you?
Well, I was telling you earlier, I use the pen name Jennifer Rose Asher, which is my name, but I don't usually use the Rose. But on social media, that's the easiest way to find me, because there are other Jennifer Ashers, but there are no other Jennifer Rose Ashers. Okay. So on social media, pretty much any of the socials, you can find me by putting in Jennifer Rose Asher. The name of the book is Journey to My Daughter. And that is also my website. So there's a link to the Amazon page for the book on my website. That's probably the easiest way to find it. Or you can just put Journey to My Daughter into Amazon, and it's easy to find. I recently recorded and published the audio version of the book, which you said that you were reading and enjoying. And that's very new for me, but I am an audiobook listener or audiobook reader myself. I don't really read visually well. I love listening to audiobooks. So when I decided to write this book, I knew that I would need to have an audio version. And because it's such a personal book and it's my personal story, I felt the need to narrate it myself. Mm-hmm. So even though I'm not a professional narrator, I did the best that I can, and I really enjoyed the process.
Is there anything you can do to encourage our authors who haven't thought of doing an audio version of their book? Because, again, to hear it in your voice with your inflection and your passion as the author, to hear you speak the words, I find it to be more of a connective experience as a reader and a listener. And again, I'm doing other things while I'm listening, so I can hear your book. I can rewind it. I can, I just love the kind of feeling of hearing you share your book in your own words. How can you encourage our authors that are listening about doing their own audiobook? Is it really hard to do?
It is not really hard to do. My publisher sent me recording equipment. You actually need certain acoustics. So I set up a recording studio in my closet because there's not supposed to be like hard surfaces. So there's clothes everywhere around me, but I have a little a little desk in my closet, and I have my microphone and computer. I would set up 2 computers and read off of one, and the other one recorded. And it really wasn't even a long process. It wasn't hard. And for me, it was essential because like I said, I read all my books audibly on audio because I'm a multitasker. I can't sit and read a book. I have a really hard time with it. If I'm on a plane or if I'm waiting to get my hair done, I have a physical book that I'm reading. But otherwise, I listen to my books while I'm driving, while I'm riding my horses, while I'm doing the laundry, while I'm vacuuming. I sit with my headphones on and listen to books, and I love reading that way. It gives such flexibility. It gives me much, much more time to be able to read a lot more. And I think it's a wonderful medium. I'm so glad that it exists. And some books I take and I speed them up at 2 times speed or even 2.5 times speed if I'm in a hurry. If I've forgotten to read the book for book club and book club is meeting in 2 days, I speed up the recording and listen to it really fast. But I just love it.
It's great. I haven't had very many authors on that talk about the audio version of their books, so I'm so happy to have you mention that and encourage our authors to do that. Again, I just think it's a great supplemental way to support the book and also help people maybe who can't read, right? Whether it's they're busy or they physically can't do it, to be able to hear the words and connect. It's great. And before we go, any words to adoptive parents out there that are listening in, and just a word of encouragement from your point of view on the process or whatever. What would you like to say to them? Because I'm sure they're coming for the topic today. And your chance, I'm going to get out of the way and you speak to them.
Well, first of all, the logistics thing I can't really help with so much anymore because I'm out of it. I adopted my last child 19 years ago. But so the logistics part I think changes. But what doesn't change and what I think is the most important part is just keeping sane during the process and taking a step back and just remember that this is a very short part of your relationship with your child. And once you get that child, they're your child forever. And it's hard, but try to enjoy that time. Try to enjoy that preparation. People talk about that the best part of having a vacation is planning the vacation. And I'm experiencing that personally right now. I'm planning a trip to Italy with my mother, and we're going in May, and we've been talking about it for months already. And we every time I talk to her, we talk about some other little nuance about the trip. And I'm sure the trip will be great, but I think the planning is what makes the trip great. So if you can kind of see an adoption in the same way that you're planning, and once it happens, it'll be fabulous, but everything happens as it's supposed to. And try, if you can, to take a deep breath and know that it will happen. I know it's really frustrating and it's really hard to not know where your baby's going to come from or when or how it's going to, but everything happens the way it's supposed to. And I share a couple of stories. I share one specific story about a client in the epilogue of my book about, it was just another kind of meant to be crazy situation. And I know of so many, it's hard to even express how many situations I know of families that I know that later on, after they've had their child several years, they are reinforced in the knowledge that they were absolutely the right family for that child. I have a friend who has 2 biological children and then adopted one, and his oldest child came out as being gay in high school and was very open about it. And my friend, he just embraced this. He embraced his son. He marched in gay pride parades. He painted rainbows on his face. He just really embraced this. And then as his adopted child got older, they realized that they were transgender. And they just happened to be placed in this family who would embrace them and would love them no matter what, and also already understood a little bit about that community. I happen to know the situation and know the birth parents of this child, and
they lived in a very rural area where probably it would not have been nearly as accepted or welcomed or understood.
Yeah.
So there are just all these stories, and it just, as time goes on, these children really are where they're meant to be.
Yeah.
So for any adoptive families or potential adoptive families, your child is out there, and you just have to kind of go with the flow a little bit, and your paths will meet.
At the right time. Right?
Yeah.
At the right time. You can't rush time.
Yeah. Right. I think I told you earlier, there's a line in my book, and it's something that I've said many times. I just needed to wait for my daughter to be born. I all these things that happened to me, as traumatic as they were and as difficult as they were to live through, I wasn't going to wait. So all these things had to happen to me, and I had to go through all this crazy trip around the world while I waited for my daughter to be born, because they were stalling me, keeping me occupied until she was born.
So if we haven't given you enough cliffhangers and reasons to go and listen to the book or buy the book or do both, you can do both. You can do that. You can do them all. Definitely go check out Jennifer's book. And again, it was so great to meet Hillary on camera last time we chatted. And it was so great to meet Fergie as well. Thank you, Fergie, for making an appearance on the podcast. Jennifer, thank you so much for being part of the show. And we're going to send everyone to your links that you've provided to us in the show notes. And I just encourage everyone, no matter where you're going in life, follow Jennifer's lead. Give some space. Don't push. Let things happen, because there's a reason. There's a timing for everything. And as Jennifer has already shared with us, that timing can't be rushed. It has to happen, and has to happen the right way. And Jen, I really appreciate you being part of the podcast. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Again, thank you for subscribing and following. And you're listening this far in the podcast, so you are my best friend. I'm sorry, but you are now my best friend. So welcome. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. LivingTheNextChapter.com has a link on the website to our Facebook group. Are you on Facebook? Probably. You can go there and you can actually interact with our guests. You can talk to them. You can hear more about their journey, about their books. You can speak to them directly. You don't need me. You can come right over to LivingTheNextChapter.com, click on our Facebook link to our community. You can talk to other listeners of the podcast from around the world who are on Facebook. And, again, speak with our guests. Don't you want to speak to the guests you just heard from? Yeah, you can do that on Living the Next Chapter. Go over there. There's links to our Facebook group, and you're welcome to join. Thanks for listening.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.